at length last year, when the Kvius was the same as this year. Last year, 8 days in Cheshvan also came out to be on a Shabbos, that Ches Cheshvan comes following to Zayin Cheshvan. And we find in the Gemara tells us that Zayin Cheshvan is the day when the last one of the Oilei Regolim, of the Yidden that went to the Beis HaMikdash, were Oilei Regel on Sukkot, the last one of them would reach to the furthest point away from Yerushalayim, which is at the Nahar Pros, at the river of Pros, which is one of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. The last one of them would reach home on 7 days in the month of Cheshvan. In other words, there were Yidden that definitely came home earlier, obviously, those that lived closer to Yerushalayim. However, the one that lived the furthest point away from Yerushalayim, he would get home on 7 days in the month of Cheshvan. And that is when they would get back into their regular system of life, which would be described as Ish Tachas Gafnoi, V'ish Tachas Teinosoi. Everybody would come back, each one under his vineyard and under his other trees. In other words, they would get back into the regular frame of work by after Zayin Cheshvan, everyone was back into it. In other words, when is the real final V'Yakov Halach Ledarkoi, meaning that we complete all the inyanim of Tishrei and we get back involved into our day-to-day life, the final stage of this is Zayin Cheshvan. In other words, the Rebbe went on to explain, when the Yidden were in the Midbar, for example, the Yidden also had a different type of a life. They had a life of, there was no need for them to be involved in any labor in order for them to have the needs which they had to provide themselves with. They were fed with the man, they were fed with water from Be'er Shel Miriam, and even as far as clothing is concerned, the clothing was also supplied to them to such an extent that even the pressing and the cleaning of the clothes was also provided through the Anane HaKover, through the clouds which were protecting the Yidden while the Yidden were in the Midbar. Mentioning this, the Rebbe added on, we know even al pi halacha there are certain details of cleaning and pressing clothes as far as it pertains to Shabbos, that one should have clean clothes and pressed clothes for Shabbos. And however, while the Yidden were in the Midbar, all of these needs were taken care of. Still we see that this was not the desirable type of life which the Rebbe wanted the Yidden to have. What the Rebbe wanted was that the Yidden should go into Eretz Yisrael, and once the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, they began a Seder HaAvodah, what type of life did the Rebbe should demand from them, that it should be in a format of Sheishes Yomim Tasa Malacha, to be occupied for 6 days a week, and what type of work, planting and growing, and seeing to it that all their needs should come through the physical and natural way, which this is how what HaKadosh Baruch Hu implemented, and this is what he wanted them to do. What do we see? That this is the proper derech which HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. And this is the ultimate kavanah why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. The dira b'tachtonim, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu came down onto this world and sent us down, each and every one of us, down into this world, is for this reason, that everyone should go through a Seder Avodah of Sheishanim Tavoid, all the details as the Torah tells us, and to bring Kedusha into all of these levels, all of these different aspects, all of these different parts of work, which a Yid gets involved with. It is the tafkid of a Yid to instill Kedusha into all of this. Memela, when we are coming from after Tishrei, and we have already passed Zayin Cheshvan, here we are coming with additional koiches to be able to fulfill the V'Yakov Halach L'Darkei. This is what we have gained and acquired during the month of Tishrei, and now once we get home and everybody gets back involved into their regular kviyasdika type of work which they've been doing all year and which we'll be doing throughout the future year, we have got to put the V'Yakov Halach L'Darkei into each and every one of these phases of the Avodah. And this ties in with this week's Sedra. What is the name of this week's Sedra? And it's spelled out right at the beginning. Lech Lecha. To go. Also the same idea. V'Yaakov halach ledarkei. The idea of a Yid going into the derech of whatever is involved in the Sheish Simei HaMaaseh and the Sheish Shonim Tavoid. In other words, all the Ktsira, the planting, the Chrisha and the Ktsira and the Zriya, all the details of work which are required to do. And all of this has to be done that a Yid is taking with him the Keiches which we have gotten throughout the month of Tishrei and implementing this throughout the entire year. Legabe, what does the Gemara tell us? That the last one, the Achli Shebi Yisrael, came home on Zayin Cheshvan. So this applies to a certain halacha, that in Eretz Yisrael, even nowadays, when do they begin asking for rain, the saying Talumot Levracha, we begin asking for rain Zayin B'Cheshvan, 7 days in the month of Cheshvan. What is simply the Gemara gives the reason? Because as long as everybody was not home, people were still walking, people were still traveling, so it was inconvenient for them, the idea of rain. So when do we start asking for rain? Once everybody is already home. Rabbi says, what do we gather out of this? We see out of this a tremendous thing. First of all, this shows us a tremendous idea of achdus, of unity amongst Klal Yisrael. That we take in consideration each and every Yid. In other words, we do not begin asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for rain until it is convenient for everybody. And the Gemara uses the expression, Achlein Shebi Yisrael. Every word is accurate. In other words, the Gemara here is talking in a spiritual sense. We're talking about somebody who is defined as an Achlein Shebi Yisrael, meaning he's at a very low madrega of Yisrael. He's Achlein, he's at the last level of Yisrael. And even such type of Yid we're also taking into consideration. As the Rebbe explained, when is the Birchas Hashem of Geshem? Rain is a bracha. We're asking for a blessing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When are we asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us this blessing? When it's Kol Yisrael al Admosan. When all the Yidden are settled, everyone is in his place. The Rebbe compared it, we find the halacha b'negei Yovel. Yovel, which comes once in 50 years. So there we find also, the Gemara tells us, when does Yovel go on? Bizman shekol Yisrael, when all of the Yidden are in their places in Eretz Yisrael. As a comparison, the same idea we have, b'negei diksham and b'negei rain. In other words, when can we demand from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the Rebbe should give us bracha, gishmei bracha, the rains, that rain, blessing of the rain? We can demand it from Hashem when every Yid is settled in his place as it should be. And all the Yidden are in a position of achdus. In other words, it shows us that we've taken into consideration the individual situation of each and every Yid. And that is when we can confront HaKadosh Baruch Hu and ask for the blessing of rain. Then the second Sikha, the Rebbe began, based on a taich, Ki loy davar reiku mikem, which is a pasuk. And it is interpreted in Chassidus, davar reik means something empty. In other words, when we don't know something, or we are empty, in other words, we don't know how to respond or how to react to a certain inyan, it is mikem, it is our own fault. Here the Rabbi, again speaking in a very strong way, that there are many that claim that they did not know what to do, what is their tafkid, what should they do in the realm of afatzas hamayonos. So the truth is, it's not an excuse, it's a davar reik, they do not know what to do, so mikem, it is their own fault. For one that says that he doesn't know what to do, the Rebbe says, let him go to a Rav. And if the Rav is a proper and authentic Rav, the Rav will guide him to a mashpiyah. And will guide him to the proper mashpiyah, who will give him proper guidance and tell him exactly what he is supposed to do. Now here the Rebbe came in to speak regarding the inyan which he instituted a few years ago, the idea of the mashpiyim. And the Rebbe says we see what the results are, that the results are not the type of results that it should be, and the mashpiyim are holding themselves back and are not doing what their obligation is to see to help other people and take care of other people and give guidance to others when it is needed. They are holding themselves back from doing so, and the Rebbe says it is totally not understood. What is he asking from them? He's asking from them to relate in Yonim of Chassidus, Siches from the Rebbe Nishmaseiden, Siches from the Friedeker Rebbe, and here they are holding themselves back and not offering this and not doing this. And there is no excuse for it whatsoever, the Rebbe says. Each and every person who was fortunate to learn in Tomchei Mimim is considered a soldier, a chayol, in the Milchama of Beis David. This refers to, there is a famous Sikha from the Rebbe Rashab, the founder of Tomchei Mimim, where the Rebbe Rashab spoke at length, and the Rabbeim referred to this Sikha many times. There's a Chazal, the Gemara tells us, Kol hayotzei leMilchemes Beis David, anyone that joins the Milchama of Beis David, Koisev get krisis leishtei, the Gemara says, had to write a divorce to his wife. The Gemara explains this was a divorce which was tied in on a condition. In other words, if he would go to a Milchama and will not come back from Milchama, the Gemara explains it at length. So his wife automatically becomes divorced and should not have any type of aguna problems and so forth. The Rebbe Nishmaseiden, the Rebbe Rashab, interpreted it in the Hasidic sense, in the spiritual sense, that anyone joining the forces of Tomchei Mimim is also a Yotzei leMilchemes Beis David, is also involved in a spiritual battle. And what is the goal of each one of the Talmidei HaTmimim, the Rebbe went on today, is that they should be Neiros Lahoyer, to bring Lichtigkeit, spiritual Lichtigkeit, all over wherever we come into contact. Memela, for one that goes and wants to hold himself back, hold back from being a mashpia, hold back from offering to bring in lichtigkeit, which he's in the position of giving lichtigkeit. Because everyone is involved in the battle, and today we're also in a battle. There's a Milchama. Which Milchama? It's the Milchama which comes before the spiritual war, which we are all involved in. The battle which is not allowing to the coming of Mashiach. Memela, this is the battle which all Talmidim of Tomchei Mimim, previous Talmidim of Tomchei Mimim, anyone who was fortunate to learn in Tomchei Mimim is involved in this battle. Memela, no one has the right to hold himself back from giving spiritual assistance to another Yid. And here the Rebbe said there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, that how poor one is, Shulchan Aruch paskins, he's still obligated in certain terms to gift tzedakah. Memela, when we're talking about spiritual tzedakah, which means helping out another Yid spiritually, uplifting another Yid, there is no excuse whatsoever, whatever one person can say that he's not befitting for it, or wherever, it is not so. Because everybody, just like in halacha, there is no Yid that could say that he's not obligated to give tzedakah. When we're talking about tzedakah in Gashmias, the same applies when we are talking about tzedakah in Ruchnias. Each and every Yid is in a position of giving a spiritual tzedakah. The Rebbe spoke about it at length. The Rebbe says there are really no excuses from anyone, and it's just that everybody should find a mashpia, and the mashpia, on the other hand, should be willing to be mashpia, and the mashpia has to be in a proper spiritual position. He should put himself into such position that he should be willing to be mashpia to others and share with others and guide them, as far as that everybody should be able to have a share in this great avodah which is required from each and every one of us, to be neiris lahoyer, to bring lichtigkeit, spiritual lichtigkeit, to every corner, wherever possible. The Rebbe again spoke, which he's been speaking the last few Farbrengens, about the greatness of instituting shi'urei Torah. In other words, to reach out to Yidden who as yet are not involved in shiurim and Torah and do not have shiurim and Torah, to see to it that these Yidden make a kviyas for a shiur b'Torah. The Rebbe says there is no need to get involved discussing any other inyanim with the person. In other words, even if the person as yet is not closely involved in Yiddishkeit, do not touch these subjects with him. Why? Because ultimately, the fact that he's learning Torah is hamoyer shabo, the spiritual light which is within Torah, yachzir lemutav, this will bring back the person to the right path. And remember, Rabbi kept on stressing, al tabeit al ma'areyu, when we are approaching such type of a yid, to introduce him to a shiur and Torah, let us not look at him, how is his spiritual standing. We should not be concerned with that. Our prime concern has to be to see to it, to institute a shiur and Torah with the yid. And ultimately we will see what type of an effect this will have. Because Torah definitely does have an effect, and when a Yid is involved learning a Shiur Torah, big kviyas, it will definitely have a hashpah on the Yid. Throughout the Farbrengen, the Rebbe referred to it many times, again reminding to see to it that we should see to spread this idea of Shiur Torah as much as possible. In fact, the Rebbe began a Sikha, where the Rebbe pointed out the difference between this year and last year. Last year was a Shana Ma'uberes, it was a leap year, and it was also the largest year in number of days which a Jewish calendar could ever have, 385 days. This year is not a leap year, and it's a Shana Kesidra, meaning that the way the months are set up, calendar months, Hebrew months are set up, we always have a Molei and a Chaser, one following the other. One month is a 30-day month, then we go to a 29-day month. And so we keep on going through the entire year. The Rebbe added on that in this year, there were two new inyanim which were instituted. One main inyan is the idea of learning Rambam on a daily basis. And another one is, we just mentioned, to see to it that every Yid possible, wherever we can only reach to any Yid, to see to it that he has a shiur on Divrei Torah. To learn Torah in the format of a shiur, meaning it should be a set time. How often the set time is, whether it's on a daily basis or not even on a daily basis, once a week or once in a certain amount of days apart, but it must be in a set way. When it is in a set way, which what we call a kviyos, it has a different impact, because a kviyos in Zman also expresses a kviyos in the nefesh, which just gives the shiur a complete different look. When a person knows that the kviyos of the shiur is in a way that it is a kviyos benefesh, he cannot bypass without learning it this time, which was set aside at whenever the kviyos will be. The Negei the Rambam, in today's halachas of Rambam, the Rambam discusses the inyan of the korban osham. As we say in davening, there are 5 kinds of korban osham. He said, we find a difference. What is the difference between the korban osham and the korban chatas? A korban chatas comes when one sinned. However, when does he bring a chatas? He brings the chatas when he sinned unintentionally. In other words, if he was a shogeg, that is when he brings the chatas. How is it regarding to the korban osham? A korban osham can come unamazed as well. Some of the ashamas can be brought even to bring forgiveness, even on a chait which one sinned intentionally. So the Rebbe asked, we know that a korban chatos was not korav, was not makriv on the inside mizbeach. Why? The Rebbe says it's explained. I'm sorry. A chatos could be nikrav on the inside. However, we find in Chassidus an interpretation regarding the Parah Aduma, that the Parah Aduma, though on one hand we find chatos kol yerachmona, the Torah refers to the Parah Aduma as a chatos. However, it was not korav bifnim. Why? So that it's explained in Chassidus that being that the Parah Aduma came to be a kapara, to be a forgiveness for Chet HaEgel. Chet HaEgel was such a chet which the Yidden did not sin b'shoigig. Unfortunately, this was a chet which was b'mezid. Memela, something which was sinned b'mezid, cannot be handled b'fnim within the Beis HaMikdash. Based on that, the Rebbe asked, the question arises, why is it that korban osham, which is also a korban, which is brought on Mezid, and we do not find that the Korban Asham should have to be brought outside. This could be very well brought within the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi said this is an inyan which is involved with a Hasidic explanation, as we just mentioned. Could be that the reason may be that because certain of the Ashomis do not come on a chait of Maisa, but come on a chait of Dibur, and a chait of Dibur, an expression in chait, is more lenient, is easier than a chait ha-Maisa where there was an act of Aveira, where there was a deed of Aveira. However, regardless, the Rebbe says this is an inyan which still requires an interpretation, and we have to understand what is the reason for it, though that the Korban Asham could come on Aveiras of Mezid. The Rebbe added on that being that this is based on interpretations of Hasidus, Tzemach Tzedek's Mamorim and so forth, he's sure that if one would look through the many bichlach of Hasidus, which were written by the Tzemach Tzedek, an interpretation would be found on this as well. The Rebbe left it without explaining. Regarding the Zohar in this week's Sedra, there's a Zohar in Parshas Lech Lecha which tells us Omer about Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi. Rabbi said it came out to talk about the Zohar already, previous occasions. Why was he named Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi? Because Rabbi Abba met this Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Abba offered him that he should be willing to accept upon himself to learn Torah. And he promised him, would he accept upon himself to get involved in the learning of Torah, he promised Rabbi Yossi, then Rabbi Yossi would be blessed with an enormous amount of wealth. And for this reason, he's called Ben Pazi, because Paz means gold. Yikorahi mipninim corresponds to the word Paz. In other words, Rebbe explained that the gold, the real refined gold, in Hebrew is referred to as Paz. Mamela, he promised Rabbi Yossi that he will be blessed with a tremendous amount of wealth. There are several questions. Zohar goes on that Rabbi Yossi felt bad. He felt embarrassed. After he realized what has happened, he felt very embarrassed. How is it, one is supposed to learn Torah Lishma, how is it that he let himself be convinced to learn Torah? And why? Because he'll be rewarded with a reward of riches and wealth. So Rebbe asked, first of all, we know Chazal tell us, one should learn Torah Shaloi Lishma also. Why? Because by learning Torah Shaloi Lishma, later he will come to learn Torah Lishma. Also, if we are viewing that what Rabbi Yossi did was wrong, in other words, he shouldn't have accepted this offer. Why? Because it comes out that he's learning Torah Shaloi Lishma, he's learning Torah because of the reward of wealth which Rabbi Abba promised him. Why do we constantly refer to him by this name of Pazi? Actually, Pazi is an insult. We know, Halacha tells us that even a Geyer, we are not allowed to remind him his maisim, his acts, which he did before he became Jewish. Before he became Jewish, he wasn't even obligated to do them. He wasn't even obligated to be Mekayim mitzvahs. Still, we know we're not allowed to chepe him. We're not allowed to remind him, there was a certain time you did something wrong. Now we're talking about somebody who turned out to be a tremendous talent. We're talking about someone who was as great as Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi. So we constantly, whenever we refer to this Rabbi Yossi, we refer to him with what name? Ben Pazi. Why Ben Pazi? Ben Pazi is an insult. It's something which he himself was not proud of. He himself immediately regretted why he got involved and accepted the offer which Rabbi Abba gave him. So here we see that constantly, whenever we quote him or whenever we refer to him in Zohar or in Gemara, how do we refer to him with this name? This name obviously is an insult to him. So in a length explanation, the Rebbe explained that when we're talking here about Pazi, meaning the wealth which Rabbi Yossi acquired through learning Torah, it does not mean the riches and the wealth which Rabbi Abba promised him. Because if for that, we would not be referring to him as Pazi. Here we are talking about the tremendous oitzres of wealth which he achieved throughout his learning Torah. It's a different wealth. The Rebbe tied it into another Zoya, which he discussed last week and discussed it at length this week again today. Zakor inun Yisrael, how fortunate are Yidden by learning Torah. And the Zoya goes on using the expression that Yorshu Oretz, they inherit Oretz, to get an inheritance of land. Rabbi explained, what do we mean? What does the Zohar refer to? That the Yidden are so fortunate that through Torah they are Yorshu Oretz. Rabbi says this corresponds to another Chazal. There's the famous Chazal that Kol Yisrael Yesh Lem Chelik Lo'olam Haba Shenema Va'amech Kulam Tzadikim. Every Yid will have his share in Olam Haba. Va'amech Kulam Tzadikim La'olam Yershu Oretz. These words of Yershu Oretz, this is what the Zohar refers to when he says how fortunate is the one who is learning Torah. Zakor in Yisrael, what type of great merit do the Yisrael have? Memele, here we're talking about a completely different Yershu Oretz. What do we mean by Yershu Oretz? We mean what the Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek lo'olam haba. And this is the Yershu Oretz which a Yid achieves through being involved in Limud HaTorah. Memele, when we're referring to Reb Shimon ben Pazi, and we want to say how great he was, and we refer to him as a Paz, that he was extremely wealthy with the finest type of gold without any mixture of psalus within it, it does not refer to the wealth which Reb Abba promised him, which he will be rewarded with for learning Torah. It's a different type of wealth entirely. It's the type of spiritual wealth which he himself was able to achieve through learning Torah, which he was involved in to the fullest extent. And the Rebbe, in other words, the Rebbe was stressing how much one can achieve through learning Torah. So here we come to this week's Seder, the Seder which we began reading today by Mincha is the Seder of Vayera. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to Avraham Avinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to Avraham Avinu. So there's a famous episode related that the Rebbe Rashab, Friedrich Rebbe's father, once came to his grandfather, who was the Tzemach Tzedek, and they were reading this Seder. It was the middle of Parshas Vayera, and the grandfather asked him, "What did you learn in Cheder?" So he told him he learned about all about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to Avraham Avinu, and the child began crying. So the Tzemach Tzedek asked him, "Why are you crying?" So he responded, "Why shouldn't I cry? Avraham Avinu was fortunate enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reveal himself to him. And we do not have this chus of seeing the Rabbeinu Shalom. And that is why the child was crying." So, as the story goes, the Tzemach Tzedek told him that when a Yid, at an age of 99, a Yid Tzaddik, at the age of 99, goes through what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him and circumcises himself, then he is worth it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reveal himself to him. However, as the Rebbe interpreted today, what we see from here is that every Yid can beg for this, can ask that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reveal himself to him. And it mustn't be necessarily at age 99, because a Yid has a schus to be able to accomplish in Yonim much faster than waiting till he'll reach the age of 99. The Rebbe referred to Yerushalmi, that in Yerushalmi there's a Tana and a Meir in Yerushalmi who's mentioned, quoted very often. And his name was Reb Bun. That was his name, Beis Vav Langenun. The Rebbe says that Yerushalmi tells us about Reb Bun that he was extremely successful in learning Torah. That accomplishments which take other people tens and tens of years, he was able to accomplish in a much shorter time. What do we derive from this? That there's an inyan that a Yid can accomplish within a much shorter period something which could take another one many years. Here the Rebbe tied in another inyan. Mara tells us regarding to Rabbi Lezer ben Durdaya. Rabbi Lezer ben Durdaya was somebody who was about tshuva. In other words, he sinned all the averas in Torah. The Gemara tells us, and then at the end he did tshuva. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh commented on this Rabbi Lezer ben Durdaya Yesh koina ilamai b'sha'achas. That there's a possibility for a person to be koina ilamai, to gain all of the worlds b'sha'achas in one time, in one little while. So Chassidus explains, true, Rabbi Elazar ben Dodaya did tshuva in a very, very high level. However, we know that mitzvahs require levushim. In other words, there's a set of levushim which every yid has. How does he have these levushim? By constantly fulfilling mitzvahs. Each mitzvah is a levush. Where did Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya get his levushim? It takes a person years and years to accumulate. How did he get it right away? So Chassidus explains. There's another Gemara. There's a Gemara about Yochanan Kohen Gadol. There was a Yochanan Kohen Gadol that Shimish Bikhuna Gedola Peishanim. He served as a Kohen Gadol for 80 years. V'naseh tzedeki. And at the end, after being a Kohen Gadol for such a long period of time, he Rachmana litzlan became a tzedeki. So it's explained in the Arizal, the Rebbe says, that being that Yochanan Kohen Gadol did a lot of good acts, throughout a period of 80 years he was worthy of being a Kohen Gadol, so we can imagine how great he was because of, Rebbe didn't mention it, but he mentions it many times. Had he not been worthy of being a Kohen Gadol, then he wouldn't have been able to be one such a long period of time. Because we know that a Kohen Gadol that did not act properly when he went into the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur did not live through the year. If he was a Kohen Gadol for a period of 80 years, he must have been acting perfect for those 80 years. The unfortunate part was at the end he became a tzedeki. So the Arizal says that all the levushim which Yochanan Kohen Gadol accumulated throughout all of his years, later when he went the wrong direction and he became a tzedeki, his levushim were given to Rabbi Elazar ben Dodaya. Remember, Rabbi Elazar ben Dodaya, when he was a koina elamai b'shah achas, it wasn't something which was just done instantly, and he would be lacking all of the inyanim which a yid accumulates throughout all the years when one fulfills mitzvahs. He got them, it was given to him from all the deeds of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Anyways, what we see from all of this is that there is an inyan of tremendous accomplishments which a person can have within a much shorter period of time. And here again the Rebbe began speaking the importance of reaching out to other Yidden. The Rebbe expressed himself, actually this has a Shaykhas Tavaita, we'll get back to it soon, that when we walk in Manhattan and we approach a Yid, and the Yid who we approach, and we are approaching him that he should begin fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. So the attitude of the Yid would be, Mela, had he heard it from the Rebishter himself, had he heard it from Tanoim and Amayroim, which can be defined as Dvar Hashem Diber Bam, Umelosei Al Shainam. They are constantly quoting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are on their tongue. Memela, this could bind the person that he should change his life. But if we, simple people, meet a Jew and we start approaching the Jew, how that he should change his life, he says, Mela, if the person would hear it from, the Rebbe says, if he would be hearing it from the Frierdiker Rebbe, he would be hearing it from previous Rabbeim. He knows also that Dvar Hashem Diber Bam, this could have an effect on him, that he should change his life, his attitude, and become being observant Torah mitzvahs. However, when we're talking about somebody who hears it from an average person, what is our approach to such a person to be able to convince him that he should begin to be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs? So the Rebbe went on that every Yid in his life sees acts of Hashgacha Pratis. Certain things which he expects them to happen one way, and then the Rebishter directs it all of a sudden that it happens in a different way. And hopefully, the Rebbe says, we should be talking about inyanim that are changed in the positive way, where Yid sees good in the sense of good, toiv, b'toiv hanira v'anigla. And by using such type of an approach, because every Yid sees Hashgacha Pratis constantly. The only thing is, at times we don't pay attention to it, we don't want to realize that what we are seeing in our own personal life is really Hashgacha Pratis. So here the Rebbe quoted quotation from the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash said Whom are we fooling? Are we fooling somebody else? It's the big thing. So who are we fooling? We're fooling our own self. So to fool our own self, the Rebbe Marash expressed himself in Yiddish. Is then a kunst? Is it something great? Anar soll opnagen anar, that one fool should fool the other. In other words, what the Rebbe Marash is trying to say, we should not be fools. We should really realize that we see certain inyanim in our life happening, and it's not some coincidental. These are inyanim that normally we would have expected them to happen different, and when we see the way they really wind up happening, we have to come to a realization that this is the Yad Hashem, that the Rebishter is the one who's leading that it should happen this way. This Indian, the Rebbe also spoke as the Hirah from the Rashi, which he spoke in today's parsha. First, let us look in to the Chumash, and we'll look at the Rashi. It is in Kapitel Yud Beis, Pasuk Heit. Pasuk concludes that Avram and Sarai and Lot and all their belongings, Vayetzu Lech Lecha Canaan, they have set to go to Canaan, Vayavayu Arza Canaan, and that is where they went to. Rebbe says we know that something which is not understood in Pshat, the realm of Pshutish al Mikra, then Rashi should comment something on this. And here we do not find any comment from Rashi. Obviously, there's a repeat in the pasuk. Vayetzu lelechas arza Canaan. They went to go to Canaan, and they went to Vayavayu arza Canaan, and they finally came to Canaan. Could have been included in one expression. Vayetzu lelechas Vayavayu to Canaan. They went to Canaan, and that is where they arrived to. Why does the pasuk have to repeat it into two separate things? First of all, Vayetzu lelechas arza Canaan, and secondly, then the pasuk concludes Vayavayu arza Canaan. Also, there's another inyan which is not understood here, and this is a shaila which the Rebbe says he discussed it in the Maimah. The pasuk begins, Vayomer Hashem al Avram. The Kodesh Baruch Hu is telling Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha, he shall go. Where should he go? Me artzecha, o me meladetecha, o me beis avicha. He should leave his country, he should leave his moledes, his area, and he should leave his father's home. Where does he go away from first? First he goes from his father's home, then he leaves his city, then he would be leaving his country. So the system in the pasuk should have been, the sequence in the pasuk should have been the opposite way. Vayomer Hashem al Avram lech lecha mebeis avicha. Then the pasuk should go on, meladetecha, and then artzecha. The furthest he's leaving is he's leaving his country. He doesn't leave his country before he leaves his father's house. Where is HaKadosh Baruch Hu sending Avram Avinu? He's telling him he should go. Where should he go? To the land which he will show him. If we look through the psukim here, we do not find HaKadosh Baruch Hu showing him anywhere where to settle. Let us look through Vayomer Hashem al Avram. He's telling him to go. Where should he go? And he's promising him. Then Vayelech Avram, Kashediber Elav Hashem, and he went with Lot. He was 75 years old when he left Haran, and there's no mention in the pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should tell him where to go. This question, that there's no mention in the pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling him where to go, this the Rebbe says this question is raised also by the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. Commentary on Chumash, he also raises this question. But again, Rashi does not raise the question. Is that siman that if we follow Rashi's pshat from Parshas Noach into Parshas Lech Lecha, this question will not stand in our way. We will have an answer for this question. Also, if we go back to the end of Parshas Noach, last pasuk is Vayiyu Yemei Terach Chomesh Shonim or Masayim Shana Vayomas Terach Bechor. There's a Rashi, the last Rashi, one before the last Rashi in Parshas Noach. Rashi says, La'acha sheyotza Avram mechoron. After Avram left Choron, Ubo la'eretz Canaan, v'hoya shem Yosef meshishim shana. They were in Canaan for more than 60 years. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. And Terach was 70 years old when Avram was born. So how old was Terach? Kishayotza Avram Mecharon? 145 years old. That is how old Terach was. The Eira Chaim disagrees with Rashi, and he calculates that at this age, this time, Terach was not 145, but Terach was 143. What is the difference between Rashi's opinion and the Eira Chaim's opinion? How old Terach was at this time, and on what is based their difference of opinion? Something which requires an explanation. To understand all these psukim, Rebbe says, we have to look back. There's a pasuk also in the end of Parshas Noach, Vayomas Horan al pnei terach aviv be'eretz meiladetoi be'ur kastem. Horan, who was a brother of Avram, passed away while his father was still alive in their place of birth. Where was this? In Ur Kasdim. So there's a whole medrash which Rashi quotes that why did Terach pass away? Why did rather Haran pass away? Because he was put into the fire by Nimrod. Mela, Avram was put into the fire, and Haran was put into the fire. However, Haran did not have a nace, and therefore he died in the fire. HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed a miracle for Avram. So actually, Terach as a parent had a problem. He was in problems where he had to leave Ur Kasdim. Why did he have to leave Ur Kasdim? It was a very bad place for him to live. The Rebbe used the expression, it was a mokim sakon, it was a dangerous area for him to live. One of his children was killed by Nimrod, his son Haran. His other son, Avram, Nimrod was after him. True, it was Terach's own fault, who told Nimrod how Avram's attitude to Avodah Zarah, and as of that, Nimrod began chasing the life of Avram. But as far as Terach was concerned at that moment, he had to leave Ur Kasdim. Ur Kasdim was no longer the ideal place for him to live. Therefore, he began traveling. Where would it be appropriate for Terach to take his family? It would be appropriate for him to take his family to Eretz Canaan. Why Canaan? Terach was a descendant of Shem. Children of Noach, he was a descendant of Shem. If we look into Rashi here, in Parshas Lech Lecha, V'haknani oz ba'oretz, Rashi tells us that the Knani was constantly trying to take away that property, that piece of land from Shem. In other words, Canaan, who really lived in Canaan, who really resided in Canaan, it was the descendants of Shem. The only thing, Canaan was trying to take it away from them. So if Terach was looking for a safe place for him and his family to settle, the most ideal place for him and his family would be the area where their relatives live, which this is their land where the descendants of Shem are. They had an ongoing problem there with Canaan, but this was irrelevant then. So he began taking his family in the direction, in what direction? Direction to Canaan. So that is why the pasuk concludes towards the end of Parshas Noach, "Vayetzu ito mi'ur kasdim l'olechas artza Canaan." They were heading towards Canaan. What happened in the middle? In the middle, a problem happened. Vayavoyu at Haran. They stopped in Haran. Vayeshvu sham, and that is where they settled. So in other words, he was heading to Canaan. But it seems like for some temporary arrangement, he remained in Haran, and it did not remain temporary any longer. He stood there for an enormous amount of time. Comes Avram later. Avram knows that they have to head to Canaan. So that is why Vayetzu Leleches Arzo Canaan. Avram had to go out and go to Canaan. And not like his father, who was also heading to Canaan, but never got there. Vayavay Arzo Canaan. Avram finally got to Canaan and settled in Canaan. Now the question arises, how did Avram know where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to live? Now there's a strange expression here in the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Avram, go. Where should he go? El ha'aretz asher areka, to the land which I will show you. He's not telling him, go to the land which I will tell you. We find by the Akedah. The Rebbe is telling Avraham Avinu that he should take his son Yitzchak as a sacrifice to Akedah. He's telling him, take him to one of the mountains, which I will later tell you. Here he's not using the expression, he's telling him, go to the land which I will show you. We see showing is obviously different than telling. Otherwise the Pasuk would use the same expression. Here when Avram finally arrived in Canaan, and he comes into Canaan, and Vayera Hashem el Avram, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was appearing to Avram Avinu. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu was appearing to him, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling him, so here he immediately has the indication that this is the land where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to go to. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Taka did not tell him. The Chaim HaKadosh asks, where do we find mention in the Pasuk? HaKadosh Baruch Hu should tell him what land he's going to, where he should settle. It is not true. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not tell him specifically where he should settle. However, once Avram arrived in Canaan, he immediately got a reaction from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The reaction was what? Vayera Hashem el Avram. HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to him. Vayomer lezaracha et enes haaretz hazos. Vayivish hamizbeach. And Avram responded by building a mizbeach l'Hashem hanirei elav. This is how Avram knew that this is the ideal spot where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants he should settle. As far as the age of Terach, whether Terach was 145 years old, or he was 143 years old at that time, it seems that the three brothers, I was learning, the brothers, Avram had two brothers, Haran, Avram, and Noach. All these three brothers were born within the same period of time, one after another. For the three brothers to be born one after another within the same period of time, it takes a period of approximately 2 years. A little bit longer, but it's considered 2 years, 9 months between one child and the other. We have a cheshm of 2 years, a little over 2 years. The Mele question here arises, Rabbi tied it into another Rashi. We have a Rashi at the end of Pashas Bereishis. And the Pashas Bereishis, the pasuk tells us about regarding to Noach. Vayihi Noach ben Chomish Me'esh Shana, Vayoyled Noach Hashem v'Scham v'Yafes. When Noach was 500 years old, he gave birth to Shem, Cham, and Yafes. So there's a whole explanation in Rashi. Ben Chomish Me'esh Shana, Rashi says, Ma tam. What is the reason? That Kol HaDoros Holidu L'Kaf Shana. All the generations until then had children at the age of 100. V'zeh L'Chomish Me'es. And Noach started having children at the age of 500. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe said as follows. Im Rishayim Heim Yivdu B'Mayim. If his children will be Rishayim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu foresee that he's going to bring a Mabul, so Noach's children are going to die in the Mabul. The Ral Tzadik says, so it's going to be bad to him. V'im Tzadikim Heim Atriach Olav Lasis Teves Harbe. And if they're going to be righteous, they're going to be Tzadikim, then the Rebbe says he's going to make a burden upon Noach to make many Teves. Because he's going to have a large family and he'll have to save them, so one Teva wouldn't be enough. Kovash es Mayonoi V'lo Yoiled Ad Chamesh Me'eshona. Kidei shelo yehei yefes hagodl shebebanav roi lo einshin lifnei hamabel. So Yefes, the oldest of his children, should not be roi to be punished before the mabel. And at that, in those generations, the Chsiv quotes a pasuk in Yeshaya, Ki hanar b'meya shana yamus, roi lo einish lo asid. In other words, when would one be roi to be punished? In those days, it was a limit of 100 years. So if Noach had his children, he was 500, so Memele, the Mabel began when Noach was 600. So if the Mabel began when Noach was 600, his children weren't 100 years old yet, and therefore they were, even though they didn't act properly, they were able to he was able to survive them in the Mabel. To hold them out in the Mabel, take them along in the Teva. How do we teach the pasuk here? When were the children born? Before Noach was 500. In other words, what is the pshat in the pasuk? That when Noach was 500, he already had the 3 children, or it means when Noach was 500 years old, that is when he had the 3 children. Pshat is very simple. It must mean that after he was 500, that is when he had the children. Otherwise, if the pshat would be that when Noach reached age of 500, he already was a father to 3 children, then when it comes to Mabel and Noach was 600, then those children would be over 100 years old already. So they would be royal Einish. So we see that how does Rashi learn the Noach ben Chamesh Meya Shana Vayeled Noach Hashem Eschem V'Yafes, that after he was 500, that is when he, in other words, as he reached 500, age of 500, that is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him his 3 children. One apart from the other, so that when Noach was 600, they were not 100 years old yet. The same way of teaching, of learning, applies to the age of Terach. Va'avram, when Terach was 145, what were the ages of his children? In other words, do we learn that when Terach was 145, his children already were, in other words, Avram was 60, because he was born to age 75 of Terach. He was older. He was 70. Excuse me. Avram was 75. Avram was born to Terach when Terach was 70. Memele, if Avram was 75, he was born to his father at age 70. Memele, how old was his father when he was 75? 145. So the question is, what is the pshat in the pasuk v'terach ben shivim shana, that Terach was 70 years old when he had his children? Same question as we learned by Noach. The Eir HaChaim learns that Terach was 70 years old when he had his children, means that when his children were born, he was already 70. Memele, 75 years later, he was 143. If he was already 70 when all his children were born, so when Avram was 75, how old was Terach? 143. He was 68. He was 68 when he started having children. Avram was the oldest. So if Avram was the oldest, when Avram was age 75, Terach would be 143. That is how who learns, the Eir HaChaim learns. Rashi does not learn that way. Rashi learns just like he learns by Noach, that at age 500 he began having children. The same he learns that Terach at age of 70 he began having children. Memele here, when Avram was 75 years old, Terach couldn't have been 143, he had to be 145. So Rebbe says there's no need for Rashi to get involved and explaining all of these psukim here. Very simple, because if we follow the trend of Rashi, how Rashi is learning Pshat by Noach by a similar occasion, and we look through all the Rashis towards the end of Parshas Noach, we have it very, very well understood, the realm of Pshuta Shel Mikra, when it comes to these psukim here in the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. And here again the Rebbe began saying how every Yid has, when he comes to a spot, as discussed earlier, every Yid comes to a spot, and this is his spot on Pi Hashgacha Pratis. And this is where every Yid constantly sees in Yonim al Pi Hashgacha Pratis. Just like we find here by Avraham Avinu, he came to the right spot, and this is the spot which HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed that he should be at. The same thing, every Yid constantly has such type of inyanim. The Rebbe concluded.
Yeah, the country in the city.
Sorry. Country in the city in the house is also explained. Why? Because Avram began traveling together with his father Terach. So the fact of them leaving, they already did that. When did they do that? As soon as Terach left, Ukazdim. Terach and his leftover children, Haran died. So Terach and his other two children left Ukazdim. He took along Avram Avinu. So when they left Ukazdim, they already left Artzecha and Melatecha. All Avram Avinu had to do later when he left his father in Haran is he had to leave Beis Avicha, he had to leave his father's home. So here we see how everything is glatik and it's Pshutish al-Mikra.
What about country in the state?
This is it. Artzecha, Melatecha.
First he left for Melatecha and then he left for Artzecha.
Why is it Bukhari?
Still not, those two are not allowed.
But at least the question as far as Beis Avicha is taka the last. Beis Avicha is the last because their travel really began Ma'artzecha and Melatecha. Melatecha is really... So this really began, Artzecha and Melatecha already has happened when he was traveling together with his father, and all is left for him to leave now is Beis Avicha. It was the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe added on that we find Benegeh, the month of Elul, expression of Melech Basode. It's quoted in L'Kutei Torah, the famous parable that it's like a king who is in the field. And then, once the king is in the field, everybody has access to him and everybody greets him and he responds to everybody in a very friendly manner. From Elul, we enter into Tishrei. Rebbe says the truth is that from Tishrei, when we go into Cheshvan, we also go into the field. What's the pshat? We're going into the field. But now it's a completely different field. Now it's a field in the sense where those Yidden who are still outsiders. Ir Lekim. Ir stands for a city. A city is a huge city where godliness is seen and expressed. However, in the field means those who as yet are not part of the city. Memela, what is our obligation? Our obligation now, once we have all gone through the Melech Basada and Elul. Together with the Melech Basada, we have gone through Tishrei and all the tremendous koiches which we got through the month of Tishrei. Now it is our obligation to give a look, see what's doing in the field. And if there are any Yidden who are left in the field, Ore Hasada, the Rebbe used the expression, those who are going into outside cities. Cities who as yet are defined as Ore Hasada. What is our obligation now? To see to it, to make from the Sada an Ir. In other words, a Yid who as yet is not part of the city and is not part of the realization of the Ir Lekim, of the greatness of the city, of the godliness which is felt in the city. It is our inyan now to reach out to these Yidden and bring them into the city. And again, the Rebbe mentioned what is one of the best ways and one of the most successful ways to be able to reach out to Yidden, to those who as yet are in the Sada and they are not part of the Ir. Again, it is all through Shiurei Torah, by reaching out to Yidden and seeing to it that they have a Kviyas Nashir and Torah, any Indian in Torah regardless. And at this point in time, it's not important to get involved into any other discussions, into any other inyanim. The only thing is to see to it that Yidden will learn Torah. And the fact by Yidden learning Torah, the light that is within Torah, the Moyer Sheba is Machzira Lamutav, this will bring back every Yid, that every Yid will get close to the Ir, to the city, where the city stands for the Ir Lekim, for the city of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Agutavach.
Does that mean that we shouldn't get involved with filling and all the other